My name is Clara Pierce. I'm 37 years old, and I am standing in the grand dining hall of Blackwood Manor, a luxury resort tucked away in the sprawling Montana pines like a forgotten jewel. A practiced, patient smile is fixed on my face. It's a smile I've perfected over a decade, a mask of polite indifference that hides the silent scream. Clara, darling! The voice, sharp and melodious, cuts through the clatter of silverware. Eleanor Pierce, my mother-in-law, is waving a manicured hand at me from the head of the long oak table. She points a perfectly polished nail at the crystal bowl in front of her. More dressing, would you? The vinaigrette is simply divine this year, but they've been so stingy with it. I nod, the smile not faltering. I take the bowl. It is, of course, the salad I brought. I also arranged half the table settings because the staff were overwhelmed. To them, especially to Eleanor, I'm not family. I'm a useful, quiet accessory to her son, Leo. I am the polite, practical wife who wears sensible flats instead of stilettos, who gives thoughtful, useful gifts instead of extravagant, curated baskets that scream wealth. I am the listener, the observer, the one who clears plates while the others sink into plush armchairs with their second cocktail, dissecting the day's gossip. I am a ghost in their narrative, a piece of the furniture. What they don't know is that the furniture now owns the house. I'm not here as a guest this year. I didn't just arrive with a packed suitcase and a resigned attitude. I arrived with a majority stake, a holding company, and the deed to every last pine needle on this property. I'm the woman behind the sudden, infuriating change to the reservation policy they all complained about at breakfast this morning. I'm the reason their usual complimentary suite upgrades mysteriously vanished into thin air. I'm the one who personally signed the directive that cut off the legacy guest discount. For the entire Pierce clan and their sprawling network of friends, I own this resort. Every brick, every bed, every beautifully arranged, stingily dressed salad, they just don't know it yet. But they will. Tonight, the thing about being quietly erased is that it's never a loud, dramatic event. There's no explosion, no single moment of betrayal you can point to. It's an erosion, a slow, grinding process of being sanded down, particle by particle, over years. It happens in the little moments, the offhand remarks, the assumptions that no one else remembers, but you collect them like stones in your pockets, weighing you down. From the moment I married Leo Pierce, I understood my place. No one had to draw me a diagram. It was in the polite, glassy-eyed stare they gave me when I tried to explain my job. Oh, infrastructure, they'd say, the word sounding foreign and vaguely unpleasant on their tongues before they'd turn to someone more interesting. So, like, traffic lights? It was in the unspoken expectation that I would be the one to help the staff clear the table after dinner, while Leo's brother and uncle talked stock options, and the women compared the merits of Italian marble versus Brazilian quartzite for their kitchen renovations. It was in the way Eleanor once introduced me to her garden club friends with a dismissive wave of her hand. This is Leo's wife, Clara. She works with buildings, I think. She'd followed it with a little laugh, as if describing a child's charmingly jolly art project. What I actually do is design and oversee large-scale urban infrastructure projects. I integrate public transit systems into cityscapes. I design green space corridors. I stabilize waterways. For the last 12 years, I've been a lead consultant for state-level urban development planning. I build the bones of the world they glide through without a second thought. But to the Pierces, it all translated to something boring and complicated, something with concrete. No one ever asked me to explain further, not once. At family retreats like this one, held every summer at this very resort, I learned to make myself small. Eleanor planned everything down to the last canapé, the menus, the wine pairings, the unspoken dress codes. She always secured the prime Lakeview villas, demanded early check-in as her birthright, and made sure everyone knew she was on a first-name basis with the resort's former owner, a man who saw her as the pinnacle of his clientele. I remember my first year here. I'd walked into the dining room carrying a fruit platter I had artfully arranged. Leo's uncle, Robert, called out from across the room, "Thanks, sweetheart. Could you grab the napkins on your way back?" He didn't mean to be cruel. Cruelty would have been easier to fight. This was worse. This was a gentle, pervasive invisibility. I was simply overlooked, blending into the background like the floral wallpaper, useful, reliable and not really there. I tried, in the beginning. Lord, did I try. I hosted Thanksgiving 2 years in a row, spending weeks planning a menu that would cater to everyone's allergies and preferences. I bought custom embroidered stockings for every niece and nephew. I remembered birthdays, anniversaries, and graduations. I hand-painted name cards for the Easter brunch. None of it penetrated their hermetically sealed world. I was still practical Clara, the one who showed up early to help set up and stayed late to help clean up, the one who was somehow never mentioned in the effusive family recap emails Eleanor sent out afterwards. Leo never defended me. It wasn't malicious, he just didn't see it. He existed in a state of willful blindness. When I'd gather the courage to tell him, my voice trembling, how his mother had corrected my grammar in front of her friends, or how his cousin Julian had laughed at my sensible, comfortable shoes, or how I'd been the only one asked to help move chairs at a party, he'd just squeeze my hand and offer his infuriatingly simple mantra. They mean well, Clara. It became his shield, his get-out-of-jail-free card, and eventually, it became the reason for my silence. Part 2. The Crack in the Foundation. Last summer, something shifted. We were here again. Same resort, same glistening lake, same uncomfortable patio furniture. Leo's Uncle Robert, a man whose portfolio was his entire personality, made a joke at my expense during dinner. Clara must be saving a fortune driving that same sedan for nearly a decade, he boomed, gesturing vaguely in my direction. Very economical. The table erupted, in polite, knowing laughter. Even Leo chuckled, a soft, agreeable sound that felt like a slap in the face. I didn't. I just sat there, my fork frozen over my plate, and felt something inside me finally, irrevocably crack. It wasn't a loud shatter. It was a quiet, hairline fracture, the kind that splinters and spreads until the whole structure is compromised. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the small balcony of our cabin, hugging my knees to my chest, and watched the resort lights flicker across the dark, glassy surface of the lake. For 10 years, I had been asking myself the same question over and over again. What did I do wrong? How can I be better? How can I make them see me? But as the moon climbed higher, a new question began to form, pushing the others aside. It was quiet at first, a whisper. And then it grew louder, clearer, until it was the only thing I could hear. What are you waiting for? And that's when the idea took hold. It wasn't a fiery plot for revenge. It wasn't even about redemption. It was about permanence. It was about building something with my own 2 hands, something with my name on it, something so solid and real that they couldn't talk over it, dismiss it, or ignore it. Part 3. A Quiet Acquisition. The morning after that night on the balcony, I made a call. Not to a friend, not to my sister, and certainly not to Leo. I called a number I hadn't dialed in nearly 5 years, a contact from a past life. Her name was Maya, a brilliant shark-like analyst I'd worked with on a transit-centered hotel, district proposal for Seattle, back before she pivoted from public works to private equity. She now managed a boutique hospitality fund. She picked up on the second ring. Clara Pierce, she said, her voice sharp and amused. Well, this is a surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure? I want to buy a resort, I said, my voice steady and clear. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. Then a low, appreciative laugh. Of course you do, she said. You always did aim quiet and high. Which one? Blackwood. Manor. Within a week, Maya's team had compiled a preliminary portfolio. Financials, projected revenues, liabilities, staff turnover rates. I didn't tell Leo. There was nothing to tell yet. It was just an idea, a whisper. The work was my refuge. I dove into due diligence reports, legal documents, and market analyses with a focus I hadn't felt in years. This was a language I understood. Numbers didn't have a tone. They didn't dismiss or condescend. They were simply true. We found the official off-market listing for Blackwood Manor 4 months later. It was a diamond in the rough, a legacy. Property squeezed between rising land taxes and the waning interest of its third-generation owners. It was the perfect storm. a beloved brand suffering from outdated management and a quiet desperation to sell. Maya's contacts flagged it before it ever went public. "You're not just buying property here, Clara," she told me over a secure line late one night. I was in my home office, the door locked, while Leo watched a basketball game downstairs. "You're buying their memories. You're buying control of the setting they think belongs to them by divine right." I didn't hesitate. I liquidated a major portion of my personal investment portfolio. I pulled from the quiet, unglamorous places where I had been stashing my worth for over a decade. My consulting retainers, my investment dividends, the boring, reliable index funds I'd been diligently feeding while the Pierces were talking. About Tesla leases and beachfront timeshares. I sold my unused equity stake in a zoning tech startup I'd advised in its infancy. Everything I had built in silence was now being mobilized, moving toward this one singular goal. We formed a holding company, Arcadia Retreats Holdings, LLC. Anonymous, efficient, clean. My name was kept off all but the most essential, confidential paperwork. I let Maya be the face, the voice on the phone, the sharp negotiator hammering out the final terms. I didn't want to be known. Not yet. The power was in the anonymity. The deal took 6 weeks of grueling, round-the-clock work to close. The first time I walked the property as its majority owner, I did it alone. It was just after dawn, and a thick fog was still rising off the lake, muffling the world in a blanket of gray. I stood in the center of the grand dining hall, the same room where Eleanor had once publicly chided me for misplacing the sugar bowl, and ran my hand along the cool, polished oak of the railing she leaned against every summer for her pre-dinner cocktail. I wasn't angry. I was calm. I was centered. Ownership is a funny thing. It's not loud or dramatic. It doesn't gloat. It's just final. Part 4. The Ghost in the Machine. From that moment on, everything began to change, quietly and methodically. We started with the invisible things. We replaced the ancient, groaning HVAC systems. We gave every staff member a significant raise and improved their benefits package. We retained the general manager, a good man named David who was hamstrung by the previous owner's apathy. But we tightened up all the back-end operations, streamlining everything from supply chains to payroll. Then, we scrubbed the legacy guest list. Citing a full policy restructuring, we removed the Pierce family and their associates from the list of preferred guests who received automatic discounts and perks. No one questioned it. They just assumed some faceless corporate group had taken over, lamenting the loss of charm and the shift in tone. I watched their complaints unfold in the family group chat, a fly on the wall in my own life. I listened as Leo read a text from his sister Sophie aloud to me one evening. She says it's just not the same anymore. The new management sounds so corporate. That's a shame, I'd said, looking up from my laptop where I was approving the budget for the new employee break room. No, Leo, I thought to myself, a small secret smile playing on my lips. It's not the same. It's mine. By the time this year's family retreat rolled around, I had every piece in place on the chessboard. Eleanor, of course, took full credit for securing the same block of rooms they always used, the Lakeview North cabins, 3 adjoining suites. She boasted on a conference call about getting them early check-in and champagne on arrival, just like always. What she didn't know was that those rooms had been reassigned twice to higher-paying guests. I had personally signed off on their reinstatement at the last minute, but at the full, non-negotiable rack rate, with no discount. The champagne was a courtesy I had debated cutting, but decided to keep. After all, a delay in satisfaction can be far more powerful than an outright denial. Part 5. The Unraveling begins. We arrived on a Thursday afternoon. The same flurry of monogrammed luggage, the same clinking of glasses, the same casual, almost unconscious condescension. No one noticed that I didn't stop at the front desk to check in. I walked right past it, deep in conversation with David, the manager, reviewing staff shifts on my resort-issued tablet. To them, it probably looked like I was hovering, maybe offering an unsolicited suggestion. The help, stepping slightly out of line. The complaints began at the welcome brunch the next morning. Sophie, Leo's impeccably dressed sister, flipped. her blonde bob, and declared that the check-in staff had been weirdly cold. Almost robotic, Leo's cousin Chloe lamented, and the valet took an eternity with my car. Eleanor naturally had a culinary critique. The egg soubise is not nearly as rich as last year's, she announced to the table as if delivering a royal decree. They've clearly changed the recipe. No one noticed me sitting at the far end of the table, quietly sipping my coffee. No one asked where I had been the night before or why I had a resort-branded tablet open next to my teacup. They were far too busy talking about the resort as if it were a beloved relative who had started letting themselves go. It used to have such character, Sophie said with a dramatic sigh. Now it's just policy after policy. Uncle. Robert chimed in, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. I heard some tech fund from California bought it. Figures. They never understand the elegance of a family-owned establishment. Leo, ever the agreeable diplomat, nodded. No soul? Anymore, he added. Just bureaucracy. I said nothing. I just listened. I wanted them to sit in it. I wanted them to complain about me to my face while still assuming I was a nobody. There's a sharp, crystalline kind of satisfaction in knowing you've become the ghost in someone else's machine, the system they're mocking, the bureaucracy they despise. It's you. Part 6. The Reveal. That night, the family gathered again for the grand Friday welcome dinner, a tradition stretching back decades. Eleanor had decreed a resort chic theme. I wore a simple navy sheath dress I'd worn to my graduate school presentation over a decade ago. It fit better now. I sat beside Leo, who was already on his second glass of wine. He didn't ask where I'd been all afternoon, or what I had been typing so furiously on my tablet during lunch. He never asked much. Halfway through the main course of grilled salmon, Julian, the cousin who once laughed when I brought reusable napkins to a Thanksgiving dinner, made a comment about the new pool renovations. Honestly, who updates a pool deck in the middle of peak season? He scoffed. It's amateur hour. The conversation snowballed from there. They all had notes, critiques, and unsolicited advice for the new, faceless owners. I listened, a calm, almost amused expression on my face, as they dissected my decisions, completely unaware. Then Eleanor raised her glass for a toast. Her diamonds caught the light. I just hope, she said, her voice dripping with sweet, patronizing concern, that whoever bought this place understands that families like ours built its reputation. We're not just guests. We are the reason. This resort is what it is. My hand tightened around my fork, not out of anger, out of anticipation. The air crackled. The moment was here. After dessert was cleared, I excused myself from the table. I just need a minute of air, I told Leo. He nodded absently, mid-sip, his eyes fixed on his wine glass. It was always easier that way. I stepped out onto the wide stone terrace. The lake glimmered below, a sheet of dark silk under the moonlight. The world seemed perfectly still, as if it were holding its breath with me. I pulled out my phone and tapped one name, David. He picked up instantly. Boss? It's time, I said. You want me to do it now? Before they pour another glass, I replied. I want their heads clear. There was a beat of silence, then a simple, got it. I hung up and watched through the glass-paneled doors. A moment later, David, our impeccable general manager, stepped to the front of the dining room. He tapped a spoon gently against a wine glass. The clear, ringing sound echoed through the hall. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. Good evening, everyone, he began, his voice calm and authoritative. Thank you all for joining us for this special weekend. As many of you know, this year marks a new chapter for our property. As part of our transition, I'm proud to announce that Blackwood Manor has come under new majority ownership. And tonight, we'd like to take a moment to recognize the person behind this new vision. I walked back inside, my sensible heels making a quiet, rhythmic click on the polished wood floor. Each step was a metronome, counting down the end of an era. I timed my entrance perfectly, arriving just in time to hear David's final line. Please join me in welcoming our new owner, Mrs. Clara Pierce. Silence. A pure, crystalline, deafening silence. Sophie froze, Her wine glass tilted just enough to spill a single drop of red onto her white silk blouse. Julian stared at me, blinking rapidly, as if he'd missed a cue in a play. Chloe mouthed something, probably my name, but no sound came out. Eleanor didn't move. Her wine glass was still raised in her mid-toast, her arm locked in place like a statue. And Leo. He looked like someone had pulled his plug from the wall. He was staring at me, his face a canvas of confusion, drowning in the vast empty space between his assumptions and the truth. I walked slowly to the head of the table. Eleanor's seat. I didn't rush. I didn't smile. When I reached her, I stopped. David handed me a wireless microphone, and I took it with one hand, resting my other lightly on the back of her chair. I let my gaze travel around the room, meeting every single pair of eyes. "I want to thank you all," I began, my voice perfectly calm and steady, amplified by the speakers, "for your decades of patronage to Blackwood Manor. This resort has long been a place of tradition, of family, of summer memories." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "And now, it's also a place of change." I let that single word, change, land with the weight it deserved. "You are, of course, all still welcome here, just like everyone else." That was the line, the pivot point. The moment the entire world tilted on its axis. "Effective immediately," I continued, my voice crisp and clear, "there will be no more legacy discounts. No more backdoor bookings, no more preferential upgrades. Our guest policies will apply equally, across the board, to everyone." I looked at Leo last. His jaw was tight, his hands clasped on the table in front of him. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd never asked a single important question in his entire life. "Any comments or suggestions about the management?" I added, a hint of steel in my voice. "Can now be sent directly to me." I handed the microphone back to David, turned without waiting for a response, and walked out of the dining hall. There was no applause. There were no protests. Just a thick, stunned silence behind me, a room full of people holding their silverware, like weapons they suddenly didn't know how to use. I made it to the hallway before I finally exhaled. It wasn't a breath of relief or even victory. It was a breath of release. Part 7. The Reckoning. I didn't go to brunch the next morning. I let them sit with it. I let them pass the fruit bowl and stare at my empty chair. Let them pretend they hadn't just been publicly stripped of every unearned privilege they had held dear. I wasn't interested in their awkward silences. I had work to do. By 8 a.m., I was walking the resort grounds with David, a clipboard in my hand, my hair pulled, back in a severe ponytail. We reviewed staff logs, inspected maintenance requests for the cabins, and confirmed the delivery of new ergonomic chairs for the employee break room. 2 housekeepers, women who had previously avoided my gaze, stopped to thank me. "It's just the beginning," I promised them. The messages began to arrive around noon. Sophie came first. A text. "Hey, can we talk? Just a quick thing about the cabin arrangement." Then Chloe. "Wow, Clara, I had no idea you were in hospitality. So cool. Congrats." The faux enthusiasm was practically dripping from the screen. Eleanor didn't text. She called. Twice. I let both go to voicemail, and then Leo showed up at the door of my new office, the former owner's suite overlooking the lake. He stood in the doorway like a man arriving late to a meeting he didn't realize was about him. "Clara," he said, his voice strained. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside, gesturing to a chair. He didn't sit, just hovered by the door, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Why?" he asked, the word sounding small and lost. "Why didn't you tell me about any of this?" I looked at him, my expression unreadable. I kept my voice even, devoid of accusation. "Why didn't you ever ask?" He blinked, thrown off. I didn't think I needed to. And there it was. The entire thesis of our marriage reduced to a single devastating sentence. The fallout began in earnest that evening. Sophie cornered me after a small reception for the actual long-term guests, clutching her purse like a shield. "Clara, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding," she said, her voice breathy, "about our cabin. It's always been. On a family lease arrangement. A lease which expired 2 years ago, I replied calmly, taking a sip of my water. She paled slightly. But Chloe said, "Would you like to continue that sentence?" I interrupted gently. "Because my legal team has records showing you've sublet that family cabin during peak season for the last 2 summers, earning over $40,000 in unreported income. I can have them forward you the documentation if you'd like. You might want to find a good CPA." That was the end of Sophie. Uncle Robert, the man who'd mocked my economical car, sent a smarmy email asking to extend his own sweetheart lease on one of the resort's condos. I replied with a formal 30-day notice to vacate the property, and a polite note informing him that it was being reassigned to a nonprofit that provides vacation housing for disabled veterans and their families. They moved in by July. I sent him a thank you card for his years of tenancy. And then there was Eleanor. She appeared at my office unannounced, a vision in pearls and a cashmere sweater tied perfectly around her shoulders, a costume of unshakable dignity. She wanted to talk, woman to woman. I let her speak for 5 full minutes. It was a masterclass in manipulation, a monologue about appearances, about what people would think, about how this would reflect poorly on Leo. I listened patiently, nodding in all the right places. When she was finished, I opened a drawer in my desk and handed her a slim manila envelope. Inside were photos, printed emails, and notarized witness statements from 3 former employees she had mistreated over the years. 2 housekeepers and a young intern. One of them she had called a mouthy little thing in writing. "I've already settled with them, privately and generously," I said softly. "But this is my insurance. If you ever, for 1 second, try to reframe yourself as the victim, in this story, this file goes public." She looked like she might faint. "Are you threatening me?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "No," I said, meeting her horrified gaze. "I'm documenting the truth." She stood up, but her posture was different now. The rigid statue had crumbled. She looked bent, fragile. When she left my office, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. Part 8. The Sunrise. 3 days later, Leo moved out. There were no fights, no dramatic scenes, just folded clothes in boxes, silent spaces in the house we'd shared, and a short note left on the kitchen counter. "I didn't see you, Clara." And I should have. I kept the note. Not for sentiment, but for clarity. This morning, I sat alone on the main dock at sunrise, a warm mug of coffee in my hands, watching the mist rise off the still water. Everything was quiet, as if the world had paused just long enough for me to finally breathe. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to prove a point. For over a decade, I had been shrinking myself, trying to fit into a box that was never designed to hold me. A family that never bothered to look closely enough to see who I really was. Now I wasn't asking to be seen. I had simply stepped into full view. And not one of them knew what to do with the light. On the easel in my office is the final architectural rendering for the new Lakeside Wellness Center. Below the beautiful image of glass and timber is the official name, the Amelia Pierce Women's Health and Education Center. It's named after my mother. She cleaned motel rooms for 16 years to give me a life she never had, and she taught me the one lesson the Pierce family never understood. Respect is earned, not inherited. Sometimes closure doesn't come with an apology. It comes with power. A quiet, earned, irrevocable power. The kind that doesn't need a seat at anyone else's table. Because now, I own the damn table. And the chairs. And the room they're in. And the view from the window. And I'm just getting started.